Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Venari podcast. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Paula Dalstalba, and I lead the Neuroscience and Rare Disease R&D practice at Venari Partners. Today, as part of our R&D hiring strategy series, I'm joined by Sonya Montgomery, experienced global CMO with experience across the US, Canada, UK, and Netherlands. She has over 20 years' experience in leadership roles driving drugs through the clinic, including most recently her time at Evox Therapeutics, but she's also spent time at larger pharmaceutical companies such as Pfizer. So, holding a strong focus on genomic medicine for rare diseases, today we'll be discussing how to best build out teams in the space. Lovely to have you, Sonya.
Lovely to be here. Thanks, Paula.
So, maybe as a start and a little bit of an introduction, I wonder if you could tell me a little bit more about yourself and your experience.
Sure, Paula. As you mentioned, I've been in drug development for more than 20 years. I have a first degree in engineering and took a focus on biotech whilst I was doing that before I studied medicine. So I've always really loved the biotech space. I worked in the first part of my career, focused more on cardiometabolic indications in small biotechs, as well as some other sort of diverse areas of interest, including CNS. And then I moved into large pharma at Pfizer in the US and UK, and was focused there on the cardiovascular, metabolic, and endocrine research unit. Since then, the last 10 years of my career, I've been very much driven by where are the areas of unmet need, and that has led me primarily to working within the rare disease space across a number of therapeutic areas and tissue targets, but essentially really driven in my career by wanting to kind of make the difference for patients.
One of the things that we tend to come across, and one of the main obstacles for biotech nearing the clinic, is how do you prepare these biotech teams to enter the clinic? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's really important to have a really strong focus on translation, to really think about how can I build up robustly pharmacology models? How can I think about the right tox study design and pre-CTA enabling studies to make that transition into clinic successful. And that means bringing in some of that expertise, that development expertise, and in particular, that translational expertise. Kind of during my time at Pfizer, one of the things that it felt like it was a bit of an education in translational medicine, and they have seen excellent increases in their end-to-end clinical success by focusing on translation. And I think that is true not just for big pharma, but I think that that's really important where you have maybe more limited resources to be really focused within biotech on bringing in the skills that will help you get to that transition point, to get to that clinical and then to clinical entrance. And then once you're there, to be looking at the right biomarkers and the right early signs of efficacy so that you get those value inflection points and you can drive those programs forward and get the funding that you need to be able to do that.
It's always a question of how to build out that translational, that biomarker team. And would you apply the same logic to the clinical teams? Would you perhaps do a clinical biomarker team? Love to hear your thoughts on the development side.
Yeah, for me, it's a little bit circular. So there's the kind of more R&D focused bioanalytical team that are maybe preclinical, but then they have to work hand in hand with your clinical expertise and that data that you're generating in your early clinical studies and feeds back so that you kind of become more robust in the early in your R&D side of things. But I think the best teams it's a bit porous where they're involved on both sides of that threshold of clinic and utilizing that data to kind of hone in on things like what are your ideal patient population. And so that may be on the more clinically focused, bringing in clinical genetics team and bioinformatics expertise, whether internally or through kind of partnerships with consultants, and just really bringing in the expertise that you need to really understand and characterize both your therapeutic and your more likely to be responsive patient population.
So obviously, for a CMO, you have clinical, you have translational. They're obviously very important functions. Are there any other functions that you think are equally as important for your role?
So I think one of the areas that we really need to bring in early is regulatory expertise. And this is particularly important within the rare disease or orphan drug space, or with new modalities where you're going to be something that's first in class. You want to really get that insight early into your program. There are really good consultants. However, if you're in a challenging space, it's a first in class therapeutic. You're trying to develop a new endpoint and validate it. I think it can be really helpful to bring that regulatory expertise in-house so that you've got someone that really understands your product and your patient population and can help bring that through successfully into later stage and have those ongoing conversations and collaboration with regulatory agencies. And in parallel to that, I think it's also really to understand how to drive your development program and what the right questions to ask are, is bringing in patient advocacy very early into your program, so that you can really understand what are the endpoints that are important to both patients and to their families. So I think those are two areas that we really need to think about earlier than we might in the non-rare disease space.
So you've touched upon an important part, I think, which is kind of that constant collaboration across the life cycle. So obviously figuring out how to make that cross-functional team is super important, but perhaps even more important is, especially in the small biotech world, I think, how do you build the right culture? How do you build the right environment?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, science is important. However, you're going to be successful based on the people. So you need to really focus on building out a culture that attracts sort of your strongest team, and it also makes them happy to work there and to contribute, and where you have a collaborative culture where kind of the team goals are what people buy into, and they feel comfortable communicating not just good news, but also kind of challenging news, where you have an idea that being able to question things, to be data driven, to be able to critique things, regardless of who, what your role is within the team, that people feel comfortable doing that. And you have to build out trust to do that. And I think, from my perspective, the way to do that is to be always available to listen, and also to have those discussions. And I think it's bringing in a team that has a diversity of both experience and of thought. So you don't want to, having 10 of me in one team isn't going to help us drive things forward. It's bringing in, the diverse perspectives and bringing in different experiences. And, especially when we work in really challenging indications where it's a rare disease, where you really have to know the biology. You may be working with advanced therapeutics like gene therapies. Your biomarkers may not be really well established. You have small patient populations. You're not going to bring in one or two people who are expert in all of those things. You need to build that up through your whole team. You have to really think about who your team is as a whole, and then that you kind of mentor them and bring them with you to towards what those goals are for the company and for the pipeline.
I think what we're definitely seeing a big focus on diversity, especially over the past couple of years, as you say, not just diversity of background, but cognitive diversity, diversity of personality. So, I mean, we're definitely seeing this as something that's going to shape hiring in the future. Would you say this is the main trend you're visualizing for future R&D hiring, or I don't know, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a really critical piece. And I think that the teams of the companies that are going to be more successful will be teams who have that in mind, who look for talent, in a diversity of areas, and look for key attributes that will help drive, their teams forward, without necessarily looking for, being too prescriptive in what that looks like, being open to, that diversity. I think another area, that is becoming more relevant, especially in areas where we're trying to establish these endpoints, or where there's a lot of imaging and I know we all talk about AI, and I don't mean AI in the ChatGPT sense of things. I mean, people who are skilled at writing algorithms that will help evaluate imaging endpoints, and help you just generate as much data as you can from that, or using bioinformatics within your clinical genetics database that helps you understand your patient populations and personalize them. So I think just leveraging those kinds of technologies and having that expertise will also be helpful.
I mean, I am personally very excited to see how, as you say, using data, using AI, and using the rest of this added layer of data is going to affect the future of clinical, translational, and just general biotech. So really, really helpful, and been an absolute pleasure having you on, Sonya. Really, really appreciate the insights, and looking forward to seeing where this all takes us.
I am as well. Thanks, Paula.
Thanks, Sonya.